In the year 1861, nestled deep within the rolling green hills of rural England, lay the quiet village of Ashbourne. It was a place untouched by the booming industries and factories that spread smoke and soot over the cities in the distance. Instead, Ashbourne thrived on traditions passed down through generations, farming, small trades, and the church at its heart. The village was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the rhythms of daily life were dictated by the rising and setting of the sun among the village's inhabitants was a young girl named Margaret Doyle. She was 8 years old, with deep brown eyes that seemed to look beyond the world around her, a gaze both knowing and distant. To the other children she was odd, quiet, and often lost in thought. But what set Margaret apart was not just her demeanor. It was something far more mysterious and extraordinary. From a very young age, Margaret had been plagued by vivid dreams. Not the kind that fade upon waking, but visions that lingered with sharp clarity. She dreamed of events that had not yet come to pass. She saw the future in ways that no one else could understand. Sometimes it was a simple image, a flooded river, a face she did not recognize, a broken cart in the street. Other times, the visions were more intense, disasters and moments of heartbreak that chilled her to the bone. Her mother, Eliza, was a kind and caring woman who loved Margaret fiercely. But the girl's dreams frightened her, filling her heart with a mother's worry and a neighbor's suspicion. In Ashbourne, a place where faith was woven into every corner of life, visions like Margaret's were often met with fear. The villagers whispered quietly. Some called her blessed, others cursed, and a few even muttered the word witch. Eliza desperately hoped it was just the wild imagination of a child. One night, after a restless sleep, Margaret awoke in a cold sweat. In her dream, she had seen the village's river rise swiftly, threatening to spill over its banks and flood the surrounding fields. The memory of rushing water and the terrified faces of her neighbors was so vivid she could almost hear the roar. "Mother," Margaret whispered urgently, "the river will flood. We must warn everyone." Eliza hesitated, torn between fear and doubt. What if it was just a nightmare? What if she caused unnecessary panic? But Margaret's face was serious, her eyes pleading. The next morning, Eliza relented and took Margaret to the village council meeting. To their surprise, the river had been rising overnight due to heavy rains upstream. The villagers quickly organized sandbags and reinforcements. When the river finally did overflow, the damage was less than it could have been. Thanks to Margaret's warning, news of this spread through Ashbourne, and suddenly the child who dreamed the future was no longer just a strange girl. She was someone who could save lives. But with that gift came a heavy burden, one that would soon change Margaret's life and the fate of Ashbourne forever. Margaret's early dreams had been dismissed by many as the wild fancies of a child's mind, but as the village of Ashbourne experienced the flooding of its river, her reputation shifted. The villagers whispered in hushed tones about the strange girl who saw the future. Some approached her with awe and hope, while others watched with suspicion and fear. Margaret herself struggled to understand what was happening to her. At 5 years old, the visions had been fleeting and difficult to interpret, images that faded quickly like pieces of a puzzle she could not quite solve. But as she grew older, the dreams became clearer and more frequent, revealing details no one could explain. She dreamed of small events first, a broken cart in the village square, a sick calf in the field, even a stranger passing through the town, who would soon leave. Each time, her visions came true, but it was the villagers' reactions that made her wonder whether her gift was a blessing or a curse. While some sought her out for guidance, many turned away, fearing the unknown. The priest of Ashbourne, Father Abner, preached from the pulpit against trusting visions not sanctioned by God. He warned the congregation that such things might be temptations of the devil and urge them to rely instead on prayer and faith. Margaret's mother, Eliza, was torn between pride and fear. She wanted to protect her daughter from the harsh judgment of the village, but she also knew Margaret's gift could save lives. Eliza kept Margaret's dreams a secret from most, fearing gossip and backlash. School was difficult for Margaret. Other children avoided her, calling her witch or seer. Only Thomas, her childhood friend and neighbor, remained loyal. He believed in her wholeheartedly, never doubting the visions she shared. Thomas was a boy of 10, older and more, grounded, who acted as a shield against the harshness of the world. Together, they formed a bond forged in trust and shared secrets. At night, Margaret would tell Thomas her dreams, and they kept a small notebook, scribbling down every detail. The notebook became their refuge, a place to capture the future before it arrived, but the gift weighed heavily on Margaret. She longed for the carefree days of other children, to run through the fields, to laugh without fear, to dream of nothing but flowers and sunshine. Instead, she was burdened with knowledge that was both powerful and isolating. The villagers began to seek her out more often, especially before harvest or during times of hardship. When Margaret warned of an upcoming storm that might destroy crops, some prepared, while others remained skeptical. Still, as more of her visions came true, the line between believer and skeptic began to blur. One evening, after a particularly vivid dream of a man falling from his horse on the village road, Margaret rushed to Thomas, pale and trembling. "It's real," she said. "I saw it clear as day. He's hurt badly." The next day, news spread that Mr. Hensley, a respected farmer, had suffered a terrible accident exactly where Margaret had described. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was Margaret truly seeing the future? Was she a blessing sent to guide them, or something darker? Margaret could not answer. All she knew was that her dreams were a part of her, something she could neither escape nor fully understand. As the seasons shifted from the golden warmth of summer to the crisp chill of autumn, Margaret's dreams changed, becoming darker, more unsettling, and beyond anything she had ever imagined. The visions that had once shown her simple events in Ashbourne now reached far beyond the village's borders, into places she had never seen or heard of. One night, Margaret awoke suddenly, gasping for breath. She had dreamt of soldiers marching in formation across vast fields, their uniforms strange and unfamiliar. The sounds of distant cannon fire echoed in her ears, mingled with the sharp cracks of muskets and cries of men caught in battle. Thick, choking smoke filled the sky, blotting out the sun. She saw faces, grim, tired, and scarred, men locked in conflict that seemed endless. In her vision she also saw a letter, its wax seal cracked but still bearing a clear insignia, a golden eagle clutching arrows. She could not read the words, but she felt the urgency, the gravity of its message. Margaret did not understand these visions. Where was this war happening? How could she dream of things so distant and dreadful? She told Thomas about her dreams, her voice shaking. "It's a war, Thomas. A terrible war that will claim many lives. I don't know where, but I know it's coming." Thomas listened closely, concern etched into his young face. Could it be the stories traveling from across the sea? "I've heard talk of battles in America, a great conflict called a civil war." Margaret nodded slowly, absorbing the new knowledge. Though she had never heard of the American Civil War in detail, fragments of conversation drifted into Ashbourne from travelers and newspapers. It was a distant storm brewing across the Atlantic, one that would soon shake the world. But for Ashbourne's villagers, the war was far away, a headline in the newspaper, a far-off tale with little bearing on their daily lives. Most could not fathom how it might touch their peaceful village. Still, Margaret's visions continued. She saw soldiers arriving closer, not only on distant fields but in her own land. Armies clashing, towns destroyed, families torn apart. The future she dreamed was no longer a simple warning of storms or accidents, but a premonition of turmoil that could change everything. Her warnings to the village were met with skepticism and fear. How could a child foresee wars that even the adults barely understood? Her mother urged her to be careful about what she said. The priest warned that such visions could be devilish tricks designed to sow panic. Margaret felt the weight of her gift more heavily than ever. Her dreams were no longer just strange images. They were a call to prepare, to watch, to listen. At night, she saw visions of soldiers marching past Ashbourne's borders, and she wondered if her peaceful village would be caught in the tide of history. Despite the isolation her visions caused, Margaret knew she could not turn away. Her gift was real, and it was changing everything, for her, for Ashbourne, and for a world on the brink of upheaval. One brisk autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted lazily from the ancient oaks lining Ashbourne's narrow lanes, a stranger arrived in the village. He was unlike anyone the villagers had seen before, tall and lean, with a dark overcoat that brushed the tops of his polished boots, and piercing gray eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. He introduced himself simply as Mr. Jameson, a historian and scholar traveling the English countryside collecting folk tales and legends. His quiet manners and keen intellect quickly sparked curiosity among the villagers, although some eyed him with cautious suspicion. Outsiders were rare in Ashbourne, and rumors often ran wild about their true intentions. Margaret, however, felt an immediate and inexplicable connection to this enigmatic man. When she first met him at the market square, she was drawn to his calm demeanor, sensing that he understood more about the world and perhaps about her own unusual gift than anyone else she had ever met. Encouraged by Thomas, Margaret hesitantly approached Mr. Jameson one afternoon while he was seated at the village inn, poring over old books and worn maps. Her voice barely above a whisper, she shared fragments of her dreams and visions, the flooding river, the burning granary, the distant wars. To her surprise, Jameson listened attentively, his eyes never leaving hers. He nodded thoughtfully, as though each vision confirmed a larger truth he had been seeking. Then, in a voice measured and kind, he spoke of others like Margaret, seers and prophets scattered throughout history, children and adults gifted with glimpses of the future. There are those who call them time's witnesses, Jameson explained. They see threads of fate others cannot, but such gifts are double-edged. They can protect, but also isolate and endanger. Margaret's heart pounded. For years she had felt alone, burdened by knowledge others feared. Now here was someone who not only believed her, but seemed to understand the weight she carried. But Jameson also warned her to be cautious. The world was a harsh place for those with such powers. Fear bred suspicion, and suspicion could lead to cruelty or worse. Meanwhile, whispers about Margaret's abilities grew louder among the villagers. Some welcomed Jameson's arrival as a blessing, hoping he might offer protection and understanding. Others grew uneasy, fearing that outsiders like him could attract unwanted attention or stir old superstitions. Margaret's mother was especially wary. She questioned Jameson's intentions, fearing that the stranger might exploit her daughter's gift or bring danger to their doorstep. Despite the tensions, Margaret found a mentor in Jameson, a guide who helped her navigate the mysteries of her visions, teaching her about folklore, history, and the delicate balance between destiny and choice. As the days shortened and winter's chill crept in, the strange bond between the child who dreamed the future and the scholar who sought to understand her would shape the fate of Ashbourne, and perhaps something far greater beyond its borders. Just 2 weeks after Mr. Jameson's arrival, Margaret's visions grew urgent again. One night, She dreamed with such vividness that it woke her abruptly, flames licking at the timbers of the village granary, thick black smoke choking the air, and villagers running in panic to save what they could. The granary stood at the edge of Ashbourne, a sturdy wooden structure holding the year's harvest, a lifeline for the villagers through the harsh winter months. The thought of it burning terrified Margaret. Her heart pounding, she ran to find her mother. "Mother, the granary will catch fire. The village will lose its food for winter." "We must warn them." Elitha tried to soothe her, but Margaret's face was pale and serious, the fear unmistakable. Despite her mother's hesitation, Margaret insisted they alert the village council. At the meeting, the elders listened politely but with skepticism. "A child's nightmare," one said dismissively. "The granary is well built and cared for." Another muttered about overactive imagination. Margaret's mother, though worried, defended her daughter's sincerity. "She has warned us before," Eliza said quietly. "We should at least inspect the granary." Thomas accompanied Margaret to the granary the following day. The air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. As they approached, Thomas noticed something: an exposed lantern resting too close to stacks of dry hay, and frayed ropes hanging precariously near piles of grain sacks. "It's dangerous," Thomas whispered. "If a spark falls?" Margaret nodded solemnly. They hurried to inform Mr. Hargreaves, the granary keeper. Though initially doubtful, the old man agreed to move the lantern and clear the hazards. Days later, on a cold evening, a small fire broke out near the granary's entrance, likely caused by a stray ember from a passing smoker. But thanks to the precautions, the flames were contained quickly before they could spread. The villagers watched in awe and relief as the disaster was averted. For many, this was proof that Margaret's visions were more than mere dreams, but not everyone was convinced. Some feared this was an omen of darker things to come. The village priest, Father Abner, used the incident in his sermons as a warning against relying on visions and superstition. "Trust in God's providence, not in dreams that may mislead," he preached. Margaret felt the weight of the event settle on her young shoulders. Her gift saved the village's granary, but it also deepened the divide between faith and fear. That night, as Margaret lay awake, she wondered if her visions were a blessing or a curse. Could she bear the burden of seeing dangers no one else could? Could she protect the village from what lay ahead? Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it secrets and shadows, whispers of a future still unfolding. As the months passed after the granary fire scare, Margaret's visions became the talk of Ashbourne, not just for their accuracy, but for the unease they stirred in the hearts of many villagers. The very gift that had saved them now bred suspicion and fear. Some whispered behind closed doors, their voices low and cautious, speaking of witches and dark magic. It was a time when superstition intertwined with daily life, and the line between divine blessing and cursed power was thin and easily crossed. To the villagers, a child who dreamed the future was both a miracle and a threat. Old fears resurfaced: stories of women accused of witchcraft long ago, burnt at the stake for powers they did not understand. Father Abner, the village priest, delivered sermons warning his congregation about the dangers of meddling with supernatural forces. "The Lord's wisdom is revealed in His holy word," he preached fervently, "not in visions conjured by the devil or idle fancy. Beware those who claim to see the future, they may lead you astray." His words stoked the fires of fear. Some families who once sought Margaret's counsel now avoided her, crossing the street when she approached or pulling their children away. Margaret herself felt the sting of isolation. The other children no longer played with her, and even some adults whispered rumors that made her cheeks burn with shame. She had always known her gift separated her from others, But the coldness of suspicion was a new and painful burden. Her mother, Eliza, stood fiercely by her side, but was torn between protecting Margaret and placating the worried villagers. "We must be cautious," she warned her daughter one evening. "There are those who do not understand you. We must not give them reason to fear." Thomas remained Margaret's steadfast ally. His loyalty was unwavering, and he defended her from cruel taunts and threats. "You're not alone," he told her. "I believe in you, no matter what." But even Thomas could not shield Margaret from the growing tension. One night, a group of villagers gathered outside the Doyle cottage, their faces shadowed and voices hushed but tense. They questioned Margaret's mother, accusing the child of bringing a curse upon the village. They demanded proof that her visions were from God and not from dark forces. Eliza pleaded for understanding, but new words would do little to quell their fears. The villagers dispersed into the cold night, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken threats. Margaret lay awake that night, tears stinging her eyes. Was she truly a blessing, or was she the cause of the village's growing unrest? Could her gift save her or destroy her? The burden of her visions pressed heavily, but beneath it all, a quiet resolve began to grow. She would not let fear define her. She would learn to control her gift and, perhaps one day, show Ashbourne that knowledge of the future was a gift to protect, not a curse to fear. Winter's chill had settled over Ashbourne, blanketing the village in frost and silence. The villagers huddled indoors, their conversations quieter, weighed down by the long nights and the worries that crept with the cold. For Margaret Doyle, the restless dreams persisted, growing darker and more urgent. One night she was visited by a new vision, this time not of fire or floods, but of sickness. In her dreams she saw the faces of her neighbors pale and drawn, their bodies weakened by a fever that spread like a shadow across the village. She saw mothers tending to coughing children and men too weak to work the fields. The sickness was relentless, striking quickly and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Margaret awoke with a start, her heart pounding. She knew this was not a simple nightmare, but a warning. She ran to find Thomas, who was reading by candlelight. "There will be an illness," she said breathlessly. "A fever will come to Ashbourne. It will spread fast, and many will suffer." Thomas looked up, concerned but calm. "We have to warn the village," he said. Margaret's mother was hesitant, fearing panic. But the growing signs of illness in the village soon made denial impossible. Within days, several villagers fell ill with high fevers and chills. The local healer, Mrs. Grayson, was overwhelmed. Her remedies only partially effective. Margaret's warning proved crucial. The villagers, now aware of the approaching sickness, began to isolate the ill, improving hygiene and taking precautions against the spread. The village council organized volunteers to care for the sick and stockpile food and medicine. Though many were frightened, Margaret's visions had prepared them for what was to come. Yet, as the fever spread, so too did fear and superstition. Some blamed Margaret's gift for bringing the sickness, believing it was punishment or a curse. The whispers grew louder, and the divide within Ashbourne deepened. Margaret felt the loneliness more than ever, torn between her desire to help and the fear she inspired. Thomas remained a steady presence, encouraging her to keep faith in her gift and inner self. As winter pressed on, the village endured the illness with courage and resilience. Many recovered, and some lives were lost. Margaret's visions had not spared them pain, but they had given Ashbourne a chance to prepare and survive. In the quiet moments, Margaret wondered about the source of her gift, why she was burdened with such knowledge, and what lay ahead in the shadows of her dreams. In the midst of growing fear and suspicion that gripped Ashbourne, one thing remained constant for Margaret Doyle: the unwavering loyalty of her best friend Thomas. From the moment Margaret first confided in him about her strange dreams, Thomas stood by her side, offering not just friendship but protection, understanding, and hope, while many villagers kept their distance or whispered doubts behind closed doors. Thomas was her shield against loneliness and scorn. He was older than Margaret by 2 years and possessed a steady calmness that grounded her when the weight of her visions threatened to overwhelm her young heart. Whenever Margaret shared her dreams, sometimes vivid warnings of storms, sickness, or worse, Thomas listened with earnest seriousness, never dismissing her. He helped her record each vision meticulously in their shared notebook, a private ledger of the future that only the two of them understood. Their friendship was a rare refuge in a village increasingly divided by fear. Thomas defended Margaret when other children taunted her, stepping between them with quiet authority. When adults voiced their suspicions, Thomas's clear voice spoke in her favor, reminding the villagers of the many times Margaret's warnings had spared them harm. Despite the dangers her gift posed, Thomas's faith in Margaret never wavered. "You are not alone, Margaret," he told her one evening as they sat beneath the stars in a field outside the village. "Your dreams are a gift, even if others don't understand. We will face it together." Margaret treasured Thomas's friendship more than anything. In a world that often seemed cold and unforgiving, he was a beacon of light. His loyalty gave her strength to endure the isolation and uncertainty her visions brought. Their bond deepened with each passing day, not only through shared secrets but through acts of kindness and courage. Thomas often accompanied Margaret on errands through the village, protecting her from suspicious glances or harsh words. When Margaret's mother fretted about their safety, Thomas reassured her with promises to watch over the girl like a brother. As the harsh winter gave way to a tentative spring, the challenges facing Ashbourne showed no sign of abating. Yet, Margaret and Thomas found solace in their friendship, a quiet but fierce alliance that would carry them through the storms. Ahead, in the chapters of her life marked by visions of uncertainty and fear, Thomas was the constant presence grounding her, a reminder that even in the darkest dreams, hope could still be found. As the rumors about Margaret Doyle's visions spread beyond the borders of Ashbourne, they eventually reached the ears of the local county officials. One cold, gray morning, a stern man named Mr. Caldwell arrived in the village, dispatched to investigate the strange claims and restore order if necessary. Mr. Caldwell was a no-nonsense figure, tall, with sharp features and a gaze that seemed to judge everything at once. His presence immediately unsettled the villagers, who whispered anxiously as he walked the streets, notebook in hand. The arrival of a county official in such a small village was rare and usually meant trouble. Margaret's mother, Eliza, greeted Mr. Caldwell at their modest home, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing fear. She worried about what the official might do if he deemed Margaret's gift dangerous or unnatural. The official's first order of business was to question Margaret herself. Sitting across from the child in the dimly lit parlor, he regarded her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "So, you say you can see the future?" he asked bluntly. Margaret, though nervous, answered honestly, describing some of her visions: the flood, the fire near the granary, and the recent illness. Her voice trembled only slightly, but her eyes were steady. Mr. Caldwell made notes but said little. His demeanor suggested he neither fully believed nor dismissed her claims. Instead, he seemed to be weighing the potential risks Margaret posed to the village's peace. He also interviewed other villagers, some supportive, others wary. The village priest spoke cautiously, warning against superstition, while the granary keeper defended Margaret's visions that had saved the harvest. After days of investigation, Mr. Caldwell summoned the village council to share his verdict. Standing before the gathered elders, he warned against fostering superstition and urged the villagers to place their trust in reason and faith, rather than dreams. Though he stopped short of declaring Margaret dangerous, his cautionary tone was clear. The village must be vigilant. Margaret's mother feared what might come next. If even the county officials viewed her daughter's gift with suspicion, their lives could become unbearable. Meanwhile, Margaret herself felt the weight of official scrutiny settle upon her. Her dreams were no longer private burdens. They had made her a figure under watchful eyes, and the line between protector and threat grew thinner every day. Winter was receding from Ashbourne, leaving behind muddy fields and the hopeful stirrings of spring. But Margaret Doyle's dreams remained, as restless as ever. One night she was visited again by a vision she knew all too well, the village river rising beyond its banks, threatening to engulf Ashbourne in a devastating flood. In her dream, she saw the water swelling rapidly, rushing through the narrow lanes and spilling into homes and fields. The roar of the river filled her ears, drowning out all else. Faces of her neighbors flashed before her, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. Margaret awoke with a pounding heart. The memory was so vivid that she could still feel the cold rush of the water on her skin. She hurried to find Thomas and shared every detail of the dream. Together, they sought out the village council, urging immediate action. Some elders were skeptical, recalling the flood from the previous year and hoping nature would not repeat its cruelty so soon. But Margaret's sincerity and the precision of her vision persuaded enough villagers to take her warning seriously. Work began at once. Sandbags were filled and placed along the riverbanks. Vulnerable homes were fortified as best they could be. Children were kept away from the water's edge, and the village prepared for the worst. In the days that followed, heavy rains fell relentlessly. The river began to rise, just as Margaret had foreseen, slow at first, then with increasing speed and power. Villagers watched anxiously as the water level climbed, testing their defenses. When the river finally breached the banks, the damage was less severe than it might have been. Thanks to the early warning and the community's swift response, most homes were spared the worst. The fields suffered and some livestock were lost, but lives were saved. The villagers' faith in Margaret's visions grew stronger. Even the skeptics could not deny that her gift had once again protected Ashbourne from disaster. Yet, amid the relief, Margaret felt no joy. Each vision came with a price, the burden of knowledge and the loneliness it wrought. She wondered how many more warnings she would receive, and whether the future she dreamed could ever truly be changed. Outside, the river settled back into its course, but Margaret's mind raced ahead, haunted by shadows of what might come. As spring blossomed fully over Ashbourne, the presence of Mr. Jameson, the visiting historian, became more pronounced in Margaret's life. His calm demeanor and keen intellect offered her a rare source of guidance amid the turmoil surrounding her gift. One evening, beneath a sky studded with stars, Jameson invited Margaret and Thomas to the village inn. The warm glow of candlelight flickered across the worn wooden table where old books and papers lay scattered. Jameson spoke gently but firmly, sharing knowledge he had gathered about others like Margaret, time's witnesses, he called them, people, throughout history who glimpsed into the future. They are rare, he explained, but not unique. His voice lowered. These gifts, while powerful, carry great risks, not only from others who fear or envy such abilities, but from the strain it puts on the seer's mind and soul. Margaret listened intently, absorbing every word. Jameson cautioned her to be careful with whom she shared her visions, warning, but not everyone could be trusted. Some might seek to exploit or harm her for their own ends. He also spoke of the delicate balance between destiny and free will. Some events can be changed, others are fixed points in time. The seer's task is to navigate these threads wisely. For Margaret, these words were both comforting and daunting. She realized that her gift was part of a larger tapestry. A story stretching beyond Ashbourne and far into the unknown future. Thomas, ever loyal, pledged to help Margaret protect herself and those she cared for. As the night deepened, Margaret understood that she stood at a crossroads. Her gift could be a beacon of hope, but it also marked her as vulnerable. With Mr. Jameson's guidance, she vowed to learn how to wield her visions carefully, to protect Ashbourne and perhaps one day, to find peace within the gift that had defined her life. Despite Ashbourne's tranquil appearance, Margaret could sense a shift in the air. News of the child who dreamed the future had begun to spread beyond the village's borders, carried by travelers, merchants, and whispered tales. What had once been a quiet secret was becoming a spectacle. Strangers started to arrive in Ashbourne, curious onlookers, fortune seekers, and even skeptics eager to expose Margaret as a fraud. Their presence unsettled the villagers, many of whom were wary of outsiders and protective of their way of life. Margaret's family grew increasingly anxious. Her mother, Eliza, worried that these strangers might bring harm or exploit Margaret's gift for their own purposes. The village council debated how to respond, torn between welcoming visitors and safeguarding their community. Mr. Jameson warned Margaret to be cautious. The world beyond Ashbourne can be unforgiving, he said. Not all who come bear goodwill. Your gift makes you a target. One afternoon, a man dressed in fine clothes arrived, claiming to represent a wealthy patron interested in Margaret's abilities. He promised fame and fortune in exchange for her cooperation. Margaret's heart quickened with fear and confusion. Eliza firmly refused, protecting her daughter and urging the villagers to stand united. Thomas stayed close, ready to defend Margaret from those who might seek to use her. The village's peaceful isolation was breaking down. What was once a haven now felt exposed and vulnerable. Margaret grappled with the growing tension. She longed for a simple life, but knew her dreams had placed her in the center of something far bigger. As the shadows of the outside world crept closer, Margaret understood that the coming months would test not only her gift, but the strength and unity of Ashbourne itself. The spring rains had given way to warmer winds, but a growing storm loomed over Ashbourne, not only in the skies but in the hearts of its people. Margaret Doyle felt it in her dreams and in the wary glances exchanged among villagers. One restless night, her vision came again, more vivid and terrifying than before. She saw dark clouds gathering swiftly above the village, lightning crackling across the sky with a fury that seemed unnatural. The river, swollen from recent rains, churned angrily. Trees bent and broke beneath the wind's relentless assault, and the village streets flooded with a sudden surge of water. She saw people running, clutching what they could carry, their faces etched with fear and desperation. She saw the church bell ringing frantically, summoning all to safety. The granary's wooden walls trembled, threatened once again by fire sparked from a broken lantern amidst the chaos. Margaret awoke, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The storm was coming, and it would be worse than any before. At dawn, she rushed to Thomas's side. "We must warn the village," she urged. Together they went door to door, alerting neighbors, urging them to prepare for the worst. The village council convened immediately, though some remained skeptical. Memories of past floods had dulled their urgency. But Margaret's earnestness and the storm's increasing ferocity in the skies above swayed many. Preparations began in earnest. Sandbags were stacked along the riverbanks. Livestock were moved to higher ground. Homes were secured as best they could. The villagers braced themselves for the tempest. As the storm clouds gathered, so did tensions. Fear and anxiety gave rise to arguments, blame, and old grievances resurfaced. Some accused Margaret of bringing misfortune. Others blamed the council for slow action. The village's fragile unity trembled through it all. Margaret and Thomas worked tirelessly, calming fears and encouraging cooperation. Their shared determination became a beacon of hope. When the storm finally struck, it unleashed its fury with devastating power. Torrential rains fell for hours, the river swelled beyond control, and fierce winds tore through the village. The villagers huddled together in the church and community hall, listening to the raging elements outside. Thanks to Margaret's warnings and their preparations, many lives were spared. Though the damage was severe. In the aftermath, as the skies cleared and the sun rose weakly over the battered landscape, Ashbourne faced the hard task of rebuilding. Margaret stood among the villagers, exhausted but resolute. She understood more deeply than ever that her gift was a responsibility, a call to protect those she loved. No matter the cost, the storm had tested Ashbourne, but it had also shown the strength that could be found in trust and unity. Yet, Margaret knew this was only the beginning. Darker visions still haunted her dreams, and the future remained uncertain. In the weeks following the devastating storm, Ashbourne struggled to repair itself. Homes battered by wind and rain were patched. Fields flooded by the swollen river slowly drained, and the villagers' spirits, though shaken, began to rekindle with cautious hope. Amidst this fragile recovery, a new figure arrived in the village, an enigmatic man who introduced himself simply as Mr. Elias Ward, a historian and collector of rare knowledge. His presence was quiet but commanding, his eyes sharp and observant, as if he saw much beneath the surface of the peaceful village. Mr. Ward quickly sought out Margaret, intrigued by the stories of the child who dreamed the future. Unlike previous visitors, his demeanor was neither suspicious nor exploitative. Instead, he exuded a calm respect for Margaret's gift. One evening, under the dim light of a flickering candle, Mr. Ward shared with Margaret tales of ancient seers and oracles, individuals throughout history who had carried burdens like hers. "You are part of a long lineage," he explained, his voice low and steady. "Those who see beyond time must also guard the secrets they hold." He spoke of a secret society that for centuries had sought to protect seers from persecution and to help them understand their visions. This society worked in the shadows, guiding the gifted and preserving knowledge that could change the course of history. Margaret listened in awe and apprehension. The world she had known, the quiet village, the whispers of suspicion, now seemed part of a much larger tapestry of mystery and danger. Mr. Ward warned that not all who sought her were friends. There were those who desired to use her gift for power or destruction. She must choose carefully whom to trust. Eliza, Margaret's mother, was wary of the stranger's influence, but recognized the relief her daughter seemed to find in his understanding. Together with Thomas, Margaret began learning from Mr. Ward not just about her visions, but about controlling them, interpreting their meaning, and shielding herself from those who might wish her harm. But the arrival of the secret keeper also brought new dangers. Shadows lengthened over Ashbourne, and Margaret sensed that the next chapter of her journey would test her courage, wisdom, and resolve like never before. The days that followed the arrival of Mr. Elias Ward were unlike any Margaret Doyle had ever experienced. On one hand, his presence brought a new sense of hope and clarity. At last, someone who not only believed in her gift, but was willing to teach her how to understand and control it. On the other hand, a dark tension settled over Ashbourne, thickening the air like the gathering storm clouds before a tempest. Margaret spent hours each day with Mr. Ward in a quiet room at the back of the inn, poring over ancient manuscripts. learning about seers from history, prophets, oracles, and visionaries whose powers had shaped the destinies of nations. He spoke of the veil, a fragile boundary between the present and the many possible futures, a boundary that Margaret was beginning to pierce with her dreams. "You must learn to walk between worlds," Mr. Ward told her gently, "to see clearly without losing yourself in the darkness." Margaret listened intently, her young mind absorbing every lesson. The visions that once terrified her began to take on meaning. She practiced focusing her thoughts, capturing fleeting images like butterflies in a jar, and sorting truth from fear. But the more she learned, the heavier the burden felt. Outside the walls of this sanctuary, Ashbourne was changing. The village that had once welcomed Margaret with cautious hope now simmered with anxiety and suspicion. The storm had left its scars homes still damaged, fields struggling to recover, and the villagers' nerves were frayed. Old fears resurfaced and new rumors spread like wildfire. Witch child, some whispered in the market. Bringer of storms and sickness, others muttered behind clenched teeth. Margaret felt the sting of those words more sharply than any physical pain. Children she had once played with crossed the street to avoid her. Even grown men and women whose faces once bore friendly smiles now turned away with cold eyes. Her mother, Eliza, did all she could to protect her daughter. She stood firm against gossip, defending Margaret in village meetings and prayers. Yet, behind closed doors, she wept silently, fearful for her child's future. Thomas was Margaret's rock. He refused to let the growing darkness consume her spirit. Each evening he patrolled the village lanes, warding off those who might seek to intimidate or harm her. Together they faced the jeers, the rumors, and the pointed fingers. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, Margaret had a vision unlike any before. In it, shadowy figures lurked at the edges of Ashbourne, cloaked in darkness and moving silently like wraiths. Their faces were hidden, but their eyes gleamed with cold intent. They whispered her name, their voices weaving promises of power and threats of ruin. Margaret awoke, her heart pounding wildly. She turned to Thomas, voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming, I can feel it." Fear rippled through the village. The council convened in secrecy, voices rising in heated debate. Some elders called for Margaret's exile, fearing the wrath they believed her gift invited. Others stood fiercely by her side, recalling the lives she had saved and the warnings she had given. The divide threatened to tear. Ashbourne apart, Margaret felt trapped between two worlds, the child she longed to be and the harbinger she was becoming. She understood that her gift was more than a blessing or curse. It was a burden she must carry to protect the village, even if it meant sacrificing her own peace. As the shadows gathered both in her dreams and in reality, Margaret steeled herself for the coming storm. The battle was no longer just about visions or fears, it was for the very soul of Ashbourne. And Margaret Doyle would be at its center. The days that followed the storm were a blur of rebuilding and recovery for Ashbourne. But for Margaret Doyle, they marked the beginning of an even more difficult journey, one that tested the limits of her spirit and the very core of her being. Her visions, once scattered and fleeting, now came with relentless clarity and urgency. Night after night, the scenes played out in her mind like a vivid play, faces of friends and strangers, moments of joy and despair, futures both hopeful and harrowing. Each dream was a thread in the vast tapestry of fate, woven with care yet fragile and uncertain. Margaret found herself standing alone on the precipice of knowledge, precipice that offered glimpses of what might be, but also demanded a steep price. The gift that allowed her to see beyond time was no simple blessing. It was a burden that isolated her, severing the invisible bonds that connected her to childhood innocence and the carefree days. she once knew. She yearned for the laughter of other children, the warmth of untroubled friendships, and the simple pleasures of a village untouched by fear and suspicion. But instead, she carried the weight of futures yet to unfold, futures she was compelled to alter or accept. Mr. Elias Ward's teachings echoed in her mind. He had warned her of the dangers that knowledge could bring, not just from outsiders, who might seek to exploit or harm her, but from the internal struggle between fate and free will. One evening, under a silvered moon, Margaret experienced a vision that cut deeper than any before. She stood at a crossroads, a fork in the path where countless futures diverged. To her left, a road bathed in light and promise, where laughter and life flourished. To her right, a shadowed trail, where loss and despair lingered like a thick fog. Faces of those she loved, her mother, Thomas, even Mr. Ward, appeared on these paths. Some smiled with hope, others were etched with sorrow. The vision left her breathless and aching, as though the very choices of the world rested upon her young shoulders. Torn between fear and determination, she sought out Mr. Ward in the quiet of the candlelit room. She asked the question that had plagued her heart for months. How much of what I see is set? How much can I change? Am I truly able to alter fate, or am I powerless to stop what's coming? His response was measured, somber. Some events are fixed and changing, like the rising and setting of the sun. But many things are shaped by choice, by courage, by the actions of those willing to face the unknown. Your visions show you what may be, not what must be. But, he added, the burden you carry is not easy. Knowing the future means knowing its price. You must be prepared to sacrifice, to stand apart from others, and to walk a path few can understand. Margaret's thoughts drifted to her mother's worried eyes, Thomas's unwavering support, and the divided village. She realized that her gift, while powerful, demanded strength beyond her years. It required her to balance hope and despair, action and patience. In the days that followed, Margaret committed herself to this delicate balance. She sought moments of peace, a walk through the blossoming fields, a quiet conversation with Thomas beneath the stars, but the visions always returned. Reminders of the future's heavy weight. The village, still healing from recent hardships, leaned on her warnings and guidance. Many trusted her, but the shadows of doubt and fear never fully receded. She had become a symbol, a beacon of both hope and anxiety. Margaret understood that the price of knowledge was loneliness and sacrifice, but she accepted it with quiet resolve. She would face whatever came with courage, protecting those she loved even when it meant bearing the burdens alone. The future was uncertain, and the threads of fate delicate, but Margaret Doyle was determined to walk the path laid before her. With every vision, every choice, she shaped not only her own destiny but the destiny of Ashbourne. As the golden hues of summer spread across Ashbourne's fields, a creeping shadow began to settle over the village, an unease that whispered through the rustling leaves and flickered in the anxious eyes of its inhabitants. For Margaret Doyle, this was more than just the nervous anticipation of a community still healing from storms and sickness. It was a palpable sense of danger, one her visions had already foretold. The dreams that once visited her only in the quiet of night now bled into her waking hours. She saw dark figures moving stealthily beyond the village borders, their faces obscured beneath heavy cloaks, their intentions cold and merciless. The shadowy presence wasn't just a product of fear, it was real, and it was drawing closer. The villagers, once divided in their belief and fear of Margaret's gift, now found themselves united in an uneasy vigilance. Word had spread to neighboring settlements of the child who glimpsed the future, and with that knowledge came the arrival of outsiders, travelers whose questions and demeanor set the village on edge. Whispers spoke of mercenaries and agents, of powerful factions drawn by tales of Margaret's visions, eager to claim her abilities for purposes dark and unknowable. Within the walls of the Doyle household, tension thickened like a storm about to break. Eliza, Margaret's mother, spent sleepless nights pacing near the window, her hands trembling as she watched for any sign of danger. She fortified their home as best she could, sealing windows and doors and preparing supplies for a sudden flight. If needed, Thomas transformed from a boy to a vigilant guardian. His hands, once steady with simple tasks, now wielded the tools of defense, learning the blacksmith's craft to fashion blades and sharpen arrows. His nights were spent patrolling the village borders, eyes sharp and heart resolute. He vowed silently to protect Margaret with every breath, knowing well the price her gift had exacted. Then came the night that shattered their fragile peace. A sharp, urgent knock echoed through the Doyle cottage just as the last light of dusk faded into night. Margaret, heart pounding, opened the door to find a gaunt messenger cloaked in shadow, his face pale and lined with worry. He handed her a letter, sealed with an unfamiliar emblem, a serpent entwined around a crescent moon, with trembling fingers. Margaret broke the seal and read the words that chilled her blood. Dark forces approach Ashbourne, intent on claiming the seer child. They come not as friends, but as masters of shadow and steel. Prepare, for the night of reckoning is upon you. The letter's warning spread through Ashbourne like wildfire, igniting fear but also resolve. The village council met under heavy clouds, voices raised in heated debate. Some urged secrecy and protection, hide Margaret away until the threat passed. Others feared such isolation would only draw more attention and weaken their defenses. Margaret, though young, understood the gravity of their plight. Her gift had marked her as a beacon, and the enemies who came for her sought power beyond imagination. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at her heart, she refused to cower under Mr. Elias Ward's careful tutelage. Margaret had learned to shield her thoughts and to sense the intentions of those around her. Ward's knowledge of the hidden world proved invaluable as they devised strategies to protect her and the village. Together with Thomas and her mother, Margaret helped prepare safe houses and escape routes. The village elders trained volunteers, while the blacksmith worked tirelessly to arm those willing to stand against the encroaching darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of blood red, Ashbourne steeled itself for what lay ahead. In the center of it all stood Margaret Doyle, a child burdened with the knowledge of the future, surrounded by friends who would risk everything for her safety. The rising threat was no longer a shadow in her dreams. It was a storm approaching fast, and the battle for Ashbourne's soul was about to begin. The night the shadows descended upon Ashbourne was unlike any the village had ever faced. The air was thick with tension, a heavy silence interrupted only by the whispering wind that swept through the narrow cobblestone streets. It carried with it an ominous chill, a foreboding herald of the darkness about to be unleashed. Margaret Doyle lay awake in her small, humble room, the flickering candle casting dancing shadows across the worn wooden walls. Her mind raced, flooded with fragments of visions that had come in the days leading up to this night, visions of cloaked figures moving silently, of steel glinting in the moonlight, of fire and fear. The weight of her gift pressed down on her chest, a heavy burden she bore alone, though Thomas's quiet presence at her side offered a small measure of comfort. Outside, the village was eerily still. The usual nocturnal chorus of crickets and owls was absent, replaced by an unsettling quiet broken only by the occasional distant footstep or hushed voice. Margaret could sense the anxiety weaving through the homes, the hushed prayers whispered behind closed doors. Suddenly, the peace shattered. From the darkness came the faintest sound, at first a whisper of movement, a shadow slipping between buildings, then the low murmur of voices in a harsh, foreign tongue. Cloaked figures moved swiftly through the alleyways, their footsteps light. But deadly as they approached the heart of Ashbourne, the villagers, warned by Margaret's urgent messages, had gathered in the old church and the community hall places of sanctuary and unity. Lanterns flickered in trembling hands, casting a warm but fragile glow against the encroaching darkness. Faces young and old were etched with fear, determination, and resolve. Some clutched farming tools and knives, others carried swords and bows, their makeshift weapons a testament to desperation. Margaret closed her eyes, centering herself as Mr. Ward had taught her. She reached into the web of possible futures, searching for a thread that would lead them through the night unscathed. Her visions had given her warnings, but now she had to live the reality, the chaotic swirl of battle. Fear and hope. The attackers struck swiftly. Shadows melted into the night, and steel flashed under the moonlight. The clash was fierce, and unrelenting arrows flew. Swords clanged, and cries of pain and defiance echoed through the village. Thomas fought valiantly, his eyes never leaving Margaret's home, protecting her from the unseen dangers lurking just beyond the walls. Margaret moved among the villagers, her voice steadied despite the pounding of her heart. She called out warnings, guiding the defenders away from ambush and toward weaker points in the enemy's line. Her gift, once a source of isolation, had become their beacon, a fragile thread of hope weaving through the chaos. Hours passed. Like minutes, each moment stretched thin by the relentless tension. The battle raged until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. Slowly, the attackers retreated, melting back into the shadows from which they came. Ashbourne lay battered but unbroken. Homes bore the scars of fire and sword. Fields were trampled and broken. Friends and neighbors tended to wounds, both seen and unseen, while the village elders counted their blessings and their losses. Margaret stood amidst the rubble, exhaustion heavy in her limbs, but her spirit unyielding. The night of shadows had tested her gift and her courage, revealing both the peril it invited and the protection it could provide. The village had survived, but the cost was high, and the future remained as uncertain as ever. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, Margaret Doyle made a silent vow. No matter the darkness ahead, she would face it with courage. For Ashbourne, for those she loved, and for the fragile thread of hope she carried within her. The weeks following the night of shadows were a time of both healing and quiet reckoning in Ashbourne. The village bore the marks of battle, broken fences, shattered windows, scorched earth, but it also bore the resilience and spirit of those who refused to surrender. Margaret Doyle moved among her neighbors with a new sense of purpose, but also a weight heavier than any she had carried before. The villagers' eyes now held a mixture of reverence, fear, and expectation whenever they looked at her. She was no longer simply the child who dreamed strange things. She was the village's beacon, a symbol of hope and, for some, a reminder of the dangers lurking in the unknown. The burden of that hope pressed down on Margaret's young shoulders. It was a responsibility she accepted, but it left little room for rest or innocence. Her dreams grew more vivid and urgent. Each vision seemed a fragment of a complex tapestry, a puzzle she was determined to understand. Some nights she saw paths leading to peace and prosperity. Others revealed shadows of loss and despair. The weight of these possible futures haunted her waking hours as well, making it difficult to distinguish reality from dreamed Eliza. Margaret's mother was her sanctuary. She offered comfort not just through words but through steadfast presence, a reminder that Margaret was loved beyond her gift. Eliza's unwavering support gave Margaret strength on the darkest days. Thomas, ever loyal, became more than a friend. He was her protector and confidant. Together, they prepared for the uncertainties ahead, learning to read the subtle signs that whispered of coming danger or hope. Thomas's quiet bravery steadied Margaret's racing heart, reminding her that she was not alone. Mr. Ward continued his mentorship, guiding Margaret to not only interpret her visions but to find balance within herself. He taught her that hope was not merely a passive feeling but a powerful force that could shape the future when combined with action and courage. One afternoon, as Margaret wandered near the river that had figured so often in her dreams, she paused to watch the sunlight sparkle on the flowing water. The river's current, always moving forward yet always changing course, seemed a fitting metaphor for her life and the future she sought to navigate. She recalled the crossroads she had seen in an earlier vision, paths branching toward light and darkness, as she wondered which way her journey would take her. The burden of foreknowledge was heavy, but it was also a call to courage. The village around her was healing, but the shadows of the past and the uncertainty of what was to come still lingered. Yet, in that moment by the river, Margaret felt a quiet determination settle within her. She understood that her gift was not just a burden, but a beacon of fragile light in the darkness that could guide Ashbourne toward a better future. As she turned back toward the village, the breeze carried the scent of blooming wildflowers and fresh earth. It whispered promises of renewal and the enduring strength of hope. Margaret Doyle was ready. Whatever the future held, she would face it with courage, resilience, and the fierce heart of a child who dared to dream beyond time itself. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the horizon, bathing the village of Ashbourne in a soft golden glow that promised renewal and hope. After months of trial storms that tested the village's resilience, attacks that threatened its very existence, and the weight of a child's burdened gift, the sun rose on a new day. Bright and unyielding, Margaret Doyle stood quietly at the edge of the village, overlooking the fields where wildflowers had begun to bloom once more, their delicate colors a stark contrast to the scars left behind. The river, swollen and wild during the storm, now flowed clear and steady, reflecting the awakening sky. The land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. For Margaret, this morning was more than just the turning of the world from night to day. It marked the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another one she had shaped with courage, sacrifice, and an unbreakable spirit. The child who had once trembled under the weight of her visions now stood tall, her eyes clear and steady, her heart fortified by all she had endured. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The frightened dreams, the lonely nights spent wrestling with images of futures she could barely comprehend. The arrival of Mr. Elias Ward, who had taught her to harness her gift rather than be consumed by it. The steadfast friendship and protection of Thomas, whose courage had never faltered. And above all, the fierce love of her mother, Eliza, whose unwavering belief had been a lifeline in the darkest hours. Margaret felt a quiet power welling within her, a power not just to foresee what might come, but to guide and protect, to inspire hope where despair threatened to take root. Her visions, once a source of fear and isolation, had become tools of strength and wisdom. She understood now that the future was not a fixed path, but a tapestry woven from choice and chance. As the villagers gathered in the town square, their faces marked by exhaustion but alight with determination, Margaret stepped forward to speak. Her voice, steady and clear, carried across the crowd. "We have faced darkness and danger," she said, "but we have not been broken. Together we have weathered storms both in the sky and in our hearts. The future is uncertain, yes, but it is ours to shape. Let us choose hope, courage, and unity." The crowd responded with quiet cheers, a ripple of renewed faith spreading through the village. Children played once more in the streets. Elders shared stories under the warming sun. and the fields promised harvests yet to come. Margaret knew that challenges would still come, that shadows still lurked beyond the horizon. But she also knew she was no longer alone. The lessons she had learned, the bonds she had forged, and the strength she had found within herself would guide her and Ashbourne through whatever days lay ahead. As the sun climbed higher, filling the world with light, Margaret Doyle, the child who dreamed the future, smiled, ready to walk forward into the dawn of tomorrow, not as a captive of fate, but as a maker of destiny.